anniversary of our church. This church started under a porch over at Brother James, Sister Sheila's house. And moved into a storefront, and now we've got this. And my friend Kevin Kello is going to be speaking for us Sunday morning, Sunday evening. Just those two? All right. And we're going to have Bible class at 5 on Sunday, and we'll end on the nose, move the tables out quickly, and by 6:15 we ought to be able to start church, if not a little earlier. All right. Well, it's good to see all of you. Thank you for being here. We left off last Wednesday night kind of right in the middle of the story of the woman who touched Jesus' garment. We're going to be reading the Mark version again. This is Mark chapter 5, and we're going to pick up with verse 30. And we're going to overlap a little bit, but there's still a few points I want to make. And remember, this day began with him stilling a storm on the Sea of Galilee. And then he cast out a legion of devils from a fellow there, got back in the boat, and came back across to Capernaum. Gets there in time for one of the rulers of the city, Lord Jairus, to approach him and saying, I've got a little daughter. She's 12 years old. She's dying. And these people say that you heal the sick. And Jesus says, I'll come with you. And as he's walking, this big crowd gathers around. It's called a multitude. It is called a press. It is called a throng. This large group of people. Those three words put together say it's not just many people. There's a wildness. The word throng means something a little wilder than a crowd. And so it's not just a wild crowd, but it's a press. In other words, they're compacting in upon the center, which is Jesus walking along with Jairus. Since Jesus is landed at the boat docks, and since Jairus is one of the rulers on the city, of the city, they're coming uphill to Jairus' house. Since he's one of the rulers, he's probably got a fine house on high ground. A house on a hill in the middle of the city, a mansion perhaps. He's well known. One of the things that now excites the crowd is, part of the thronginess about the crowd is the two great men walking together. This one is politically great, Jairus. This other one is spiritually great, Jesus. And here Jesus and Jairus walking together in this hurricane of humanity swirling about them. And coming up behind the group of people that are following Jesus as he goes up, comes this little woman we described last week. And she says within herself, if I could just touch the hem of his garment, I would be made whole. And she does so. And verse 30 says, and Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him around in the press and said, who touched my clothes? Let's just look at that verse for a minute or two. Other versions say he realized that power had gone out of him. King James has virtue here. It's really strange. He's just come from a place where he cast powers out of a man. And now something is being taken out of him. The powers he cast out of a man were evil powers, craziness. The power that's being taken out of him is a power of pure virtue. What's the difference? I mean, does Jesus lack something now, knowing within himself that something's gone from him? Does he lack something? Well, do you know the difference between a fountain and a pool? You can take a bucket full of water out of a pond or a pool, and the pool is diminished. Something's gone from him. But go to a fountain and take a bucket of water, nothing's gone because it's continually flowing up. The difference is what was in the man's soul at the tombs was a filthy pond. And all the filth was cast out of it. What Jesus is, his soul is not a pond, it's a fountain. It cannot be diminished. The more you take from it, the more it continues to flow up and be the same. The idea of a fountain flowing up, not only is Jesus the only person that's ever had this on earth, but he promises it to you and me, that his Spirit will be like a fountain of living waters flowing up from our innermost beings, something that it does not diminish. The more it flows, the more it continues to flow. David said something like that when he spoke of his relationship with God, and he said, "Now my cup runs over. I've got more blessings than I can contain. Here, you want some? I've got plenty." David prefigured this idea of a fountain coming up. I was speaking in Bible class about the rock of Horeb, where the water just came out of the sheer face of the rock, just miraculously. And even so, if the Holy Spirit is with you or in you, the more you let it flow, the more it will continue to flow. Give it out. He perceives that something has gone out of him. And I talked last week about, did he not know who touched his clothes? Who touched the hem of his garment? And of course, he does know, because we're told that he looks around the crowd and to see her. He looks around to see her who had done it. So then he spoke to her. I've got a little sermon I've preached for years. I put it together a long time ago about 7 ways to know Jesus. I'm going to list them real quick, all shown in this little woman who touches the hem of his garment. First of all, we're told that she had heard about Jesus. The first way you'll know him is from the testimony of others. Secondly, she gets into the crowd, and they're milling about, and shoving one another, and of course shoving her, and she's fearful for her life because she's as frail as a little featherless bird, and she thinks she might die, but she's dying slowly anyway. Better to die trying to touch him. She can't get to him. That's why she uses the word if I can just touch the hem of his garment. But because she says him, that's down the low part, the fringe of the garment. It may mean that she's been knocked over and she's being tread upon. She looks at all the footsteps. Imagine her down in the dust trying to get up, and somebody's knee catches her, someone's foot that trips over the calf of her leg, and it's just a mess. And all she sees is feet, and they're milling about back and forth, side to side, but she sees one pair of footsteps there that aren't pushed around by anyone else. As the eye of this storm moves near her, she sees the feet of Jesus. And his footsteps walk confidently forward with purpose and meaning and decisiveness. All of the others are there for various reasons. She knows him by his footsteps. Listen, if you believe in him by the testimony of others, the next thing you're going to know of him are his ways, his footsteps. And then she touches the hem of his garment and knows him the third way, the thrill of his presence. Once you reach out to him, you get the touch of his presence, and that's what this verse is we're looking at, the thrill of his presence. She's healed by this touch of his, or her touch upon him. And she knows now that something has come from him into her. Now she'll know him the fourth manner. She hears his voice. Who touched my clothes? And then will be the fifth way she'll know it. As she approaches, she rises up and she raises her head, and there his eyes lock into hers. Now she sees his face. And then the sixth way, she'll be related to Jesus. He calls her daughter. Well, she's not his daughter. In all versions, he says to her, daughter. Well, Jesus ain't married and he ain't got no kids. So what does that mean? Well, what's a daughter? I have 2 daughters. Dustin Potter's got about 18, I think. Can't count all of them. What am I saying when I look upon one of my daughters and say she's my daughter? Well, what that literally means, I can't say it of other girls or females, not in a literal sense. But when I call my daughter, daughter, I'm looking at her, she's got me in her. My DNA is in her. Something of my stance, my facial characteristics, some of my habits, good or bad, and different things, I see them reflected in her. I'm in her, and some of her is still in me. When Jesus looks at someone and says, daughter or son, he is saying, you're in my family. Some of what's in me is in you. And we literally read it in that verse. Something went out of him into her. She is now a member of his family, related to him. Some of his DNA is in this woman. And it came in just through the touch of his garment. And then the seventh way she'll know him. He looks at her, and this is very important to the rest of what I'll talk about tonight. He says, your faith has made you whole. He imparts the understanding of faith to her. And I want to say something about that word faith. The Old Testament, let me get my Bible here and show you something. Chris hates for me to come down here because the camera misses me or something, and he's trying to show me on the internet tonight, so I'll get back up here. But I like being down. I want to show you something here. This is my Bible, and right here, this much is right there. This much, you see that? In my Bible, that's not even a half an inch thick, right? That's the New Testament. All of this, look at it, about an inch and a half thick. That's the Old Testament. The Old Testament covers a period of about 4,000 years. The New Testament covers a period of about 60 or 70 years. The Old Testament has, well, in my Bible, the Old Testament's got 1,400 pages. The New Testament has a little over 400 pages. Quite a difference. And yet, in all the Old Testament, the word faith only appears how many times? What would you guess? How many times does the word faith appear in all of that Old Testament? 2 times. Only twice. And both times, it's used as a rebuke that nobody has faith. The first time is in the life of Moses. Moses gets so frustrated with the people. One time he stands up, they're complaining about what they don't have. You know, we don't have manna, we don't have good water, we don't have, how are we going to get this? We don't have meat. And Moses stands up now, he says, I'll tell you what else you don't have. You are a people altogether without faith. First time the word's used in the Bible. So they've never heard that word before, probably. I can just see one of the complainers looking at the other saying, we're without what? I don't know, something he calls faith. Well, that's just another thing we ain't got. We ain't got no bread, we ain't got no water, now we ain't got no faith. The word faith is not used again in the Old Testament until the time of King Hezekiah, roughly 500 years before Christ. Well, 600. King Hezekiah. And there's a prophet in the land named Isaiah, and another one called Zephaniah, and another one called Hosea, and another one called Micah, and another. These are the prophets that all lived and prophesied at the same time and surely knew one another, because this group of prophets quoted each other. This other one, his name is Habakkuk, or Habakkuk as some say it. And he's the next guy, 1,000 years after Moses, to use the word faith. And Habakkuk writes this. I mean, you go home and read Habakkuk. You can read it in 5-10 minutes. It's 3 little chapters. And God speaks to Habakkuk and says this: the people that you deal with, they have no belief in them and no consistency. And that's why they are unjust. But Habakkuk, there are a people coming who will be called just, and the just will live by faith in their God. Now, what Habakkuk and God are talking about is, just like in Moses' time, these people ain't got no faith, but there's somebody coming who will have faith. Now Jesus arrives on the scene. And in his ministry, he uses the word faith over and over again. The writings of Paul writes so much about faith, so does Peter, so does James, so does Jude. All of the New Testament writers talk about faith, and it seems that Jesus Christ has brought into the world this thing that he now talks about, faith. Because I've come, you have faith. I brought faith into Israel. I brought faith among humanity. He looks at this little woman and he says, your faith has made you whole. Well, she might argue, no, it was touching the hem of your garment that made me whole. Well, we'll see. On one hand, it's his power to do it. On the other hand, it's our ability to believe. I hear some of these faith teachers talking about, you've got to build up your faith, and some of you won't get enough faith. To me, that's not what faith is. Faith is, since we know he has the power to do something, our faith is our simple covenant of trust in him. Somehow, I trust that you're going to do it for me. The power is not in me. The ability to work up faith is not in me. Faith is rather when you stop trying to work up something and simply come into covenant with him. Habakkuk had mentioned faith in connection with righteousness. The just shall live by faith. And who's righteous? Somebody who obeys all the rules? Well, no, because we all fail at some of the rules. What really is righteousness? Now get this. It goes all the way back to Abraham. The Bible says Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness. Now, the word faith wasn't used, but believe. But it was simply when Abraham resigned and said, I've tried to work this out. I can't do it. I'm in your hands. And God said, now I'll call you righteous. So faith is a kind of covenant with the Lord. Is that interesting to anyone? I ain't getting no amens. So we come down to this. Verse 35, if you move up to it on the screen. While he yet spake, he's still He's just now, even while he's saying to this woman, your faith has made you whole, some men pushed through the crowd past him to talk to Lord Jairus, who's standing by his side. And they said, thy daughter is dead. Why troublest thou the master any further? But Jesus, not heeding the words that they spoke, said unto the ruler of the synagogue, fear not, only believe. When they came, imagine, here's Jairus who's come through all this, come across town. He's in the middle of all these people just to get Jesus to come to his house and pray for his daughter. And all of this is going on. And here come these two servants from his house to say to him out there in front of everyone, your daughter has died while you've been gone. Imagine the man's knees failing him, and he crumples down, and Jesus' arm catches him and holds him up and says, fear not, fear not. Don't you be afraid. Only believe. And he suffers no man to follow with him save Peter and James and John, the brother of James. Turns around to the crowd and says, no, he commands them, don't anybody come with me. You all stay here. Stay here. This is enough. Stay here and listen to this little woman that just touched the hem of my garment. Listen to her tell you all her story again. I don't want anybody coming with me. You three come. Peter, James, and John. Come with me. And in the Matthew version, we read it's Peter, James, and John, and also in the Luke version. So, no, I'm sorry. The Luke version just says, and certain went with Jesus. But Matthew and Mark, no, I've got it backwards. Matthew doesn't say Peter, James, and John. Mark and Luke do. Okay, does not matter. Here's something I want to say. Why does he pick those three? Peter, James, and John, you guys come with me. Nobody else. Why those three? Anybody got any ideas? Because they're the ones that trusted him. So the 9 other apostles don't. At least not as much. I mean, it's a good proposition. What do you think, Julie? James and John, Jesus had once called them sons of thunder, which is not a compliment. Because they were the two brothers, the sons of Zebedee, and they were always quarreling with one another, we're told. You know what thunder is? It's the noise that comes when two clouds bump into one another. Jesus said, y'all just a bunch of gas bags making noise. Sons of thunder. And what about Peter? Well, we find that Peter is the most rebuked of the disciples. Jesus will severely rebuke James and John also. In fact, as we look through the 4 Gospels, we find that these 3, I read, there's some church tradition that these were the inner circle with Jesus, There's him, and then there's these 3, and then there's the other 9, and then there's the 70, and so there's this hierarchy set up. Churches love to talk that way. But it seems to me, on a few occasions, he picks Peter, James, and John. He takes them up on the Mount of Transfiguration. He takes them into Jairus' daughter's bedroom. Why does he select them several times to talk just to those 3? Well, it's because they're the ones that have, I would think, the least faith among his disciples. They are vying with one another for position. James and John arguing about which one's going to be greatest in the kingdom, and Jesus says, shut up, none of you will. And their mother shows up and says, we'll get to it. Mrs. Zebedee shows up and says, Master, when you come to your kingdom, I know that my 2 sons are going to be the greatest of your disciples, and I just want to ask you to put a little throne on your right and on your left, nail them to the floor so they won't be moving them around, and let my 2 sons sit there in your kingdom on your right hand and left hand. And Jesus is thinking, oh my goodness, lady, I'm willing to be crucified between two thieves, but to spend eternity between two quarreling brothers, I'm not willing to do. And he said, James and John, come here. Listen, Mama. I want to ask you boys something. James, John, can you drink of the cup I'm going to drink of, and without hesitation or wisdom? And he said, sure we can. He said, well, can you be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with? Sure I can. At least I believe I can. I don't know if he can. Yeah, I can. More than you. Still quarreling. Neither of them knew that he was talking about the cup of his suffering and the baptism of death that he'll go through. Not the baptism of the Holy Ghost. That's not what he's referring to here. But the baptism of death. You know, even water baptism signifies death, doesn't it? Buried in baptism. Well, Jesus is going to go through the baptism of death, just as he had been baptized in water. All men go down into the waters of death. The difference is he will come up out of it to die never again. They don't even know what he's asking them about when he says cup and baptism there. But they argue. Peter gets rebuked so much. He's the only disciple Jesus ever looks at and calls him Satan. Get thee behind me, Satan. And of course, at the Last Supper, Jesus will look around at the 12 and say, have not I chosen you 12, yet one of you is a devil? And they all turn and look at Peter, you know, because they were there at Caesarea Philippi when Jesus called Peter Satan. And that is why Peter begins to argue the loudest. I'll never deny you, Lord. Some of them might, but it won't be me. And Jesus rebukes him for saying that. Shut up, Peter, before the chicken hollers twice, and tomorrow morning you will have cursed me and denied me 3 times. So Peter says, I'll prove to him that I'm the most faithful of his disciples. Lord, I'll never forsake you. And they get out there, and the soldiers come on the Mount of Olives to arrest Jesus, and Peter says, here's my time to show him how true I am to him. Pulls his sword out and charges at him like a madman, swinging in the dark. Doesn't hit any of them. Just slices off the ear of Malchus, the servant of the high priest. And there Malchus, and Jesus turns. There's Peter standing, look at Jesus. See, I'm the one who'll fight for you. And Jesus says, you idiot, put away your sword. You live by the sword, you'll die by the sword. Even in defending Jesus, Peter does the wrong thing. And then what does Jesus do? Works his last healing miracle before going to the cross. Picks up the guy's ear and sticks it back on his head. And heals it. Peter goes off. He says, I'll stand for the Lord. I'll show him. When he comes, he's in the high priest's house. Got him on trial. When they lead him back out, he's going to see old Peter standing here. I don't know where all the others have gone, but old Peter'll still be standing here waiting for him. He'll see I'm faithful. Boy, it's cold out here. Those Roman soldiers over there got a fire. I think I'll just go over and see if I can kind of stand among them and warm myself by their fire. Gets among them, and suddenly he's afraid of what they might do. And they say, hey, aren't you one of those that were with him? Well, I don't know who you're talking about. No, not me. One said, yeah, I'm listening to you talk now. You don't speak like a Jerusalemite. You've got that Galilean accent. Your speech betrays you. And Peter says, I don't know what you're saying. Little girl comes by and says, hey, Brother Peter. And he curses the name of the Lord. I don't know the man. And just while he's saying that, the big door opens and they lead Jesus out, and the gospel says as Jesus passes, bloody, tied, he turns and looks upon Peter. And Peter goes out and weeps for 3 days. Peter, James, and John aren't the best. They're the worst. And Jesus brings them into his companionship. I mean, in a way of looking at it, I'm saying. So that they can behold and believe and understand. We'll get to more discussion of that later when we get up to the Mount of Transfiguration episode. And what Peter, James, and John will see with Jesus on that mountain. Anyway, he brings them now into Jairus' household with him. And there's a great tumult outside the house as they arrive. Matthew says they're flute players and a crowd around the house making tumult. Well, these are paid mourners, professional mourners. You see, if you got any money at all and your wife dies or your husband dies or one of your children or one of your parents, if you've got any money at all, you'll hire someone to sing laments walking through the streets of the city, or at least through your neighborhood where your family was known. They had no newspapers with obituaries. You hire a mourner to go through and say, oh, calling the people of the neighborhood like a town crier, singing a song, putting the name of the deceased in the song. Come and weep with me, come and weep. In this case, Jairus was a wealthy man, so all of the professional mourners showed up at his house, and they're playing their flutes and singing. They want Mrs. Jairus to come out, or send one of the servants out and say who the ones, how much they're going to get paid, And they're out there practicing to outdo one another. And so there's a big tumult. Tumult is a cacophony of noise. You ever go to a symphony? Before it starts, down in the orchestra pit, before the lights go low, if you get there early enough, you'll hear the oboe and the fiddles, and you'll hear the saxophones. They're all tuning up or going over different parts, and it just sounds like an utter chaos until the maestro stands up and taps his baton. They all get quiet. He raises his hand, and a lovely chord of perfect harmony rises up out of that orchestra pit. But the tumult is what's going on ahead of time. Now look at all these people. They're practicing their wailing. Oh, listen, hear us, Jairus, the Lord of Capernaum. His little daughter, whom we all loved, hath died. Ho, 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 ho. Jesus walks right through all them, getting up to the door of Jairus' house, and he turns to him, verse 39, and he says, why make ye a tumult and weep? The child is not dead, but she sleepeth. And they laughed him to scorn. That phrase is in all three. They laugh. Look how quickly their weeping and mourning turns to laughter. What a bunch of two-faced people. They can be weeping one moment, and then someone says, no reason to weep. Child's not dead, she's just asleep. And immediately they turn to laughter. And this is not happy laughter, but scornful laughter. It's a perfect picture of how people can turn it off and turn it on. Jesus pushes right through them. Verse 40, but he, having put them all forth. Now they're outside the house. Jesus says, everybody out of the courtyard here. Call servants. Jairus says, yes, help him. And they put all of these paid mourners right out through the garden gate, out into the street. Now, Jesus takes, let's see who's here. Jesus, Jairus is with him. Peter, James, and John, that's 5. They go into the bedroom, and there's Jairus' wife, that's 6. And the little girl lying lifeless on the bed makes 7. 7 people in that room. Takes the father of the child and her mother, and Peter, James, and John, them that were with him, and he goes in where the child was. And taking the child by the hand, and only Mark has this, he says to her, Talitha kumi. Talitha kumi, which is being interpreted, damsel, I say unto thee, arise. Matthew doesn't have Jesus saying anything here. It just says that he raised the girl up. But Luke has this. He calls her by name and says, "Maiden, arise." Mark gives us the Aramaic and then translates it into Greek for us. So we have both the Aramaic and the Greek translated into English. Talitha kumi, damsel, get up. Anyway, straightway the damsel rises up and walks, for she's 12 years old, and they were amazed straightway with a great amazement. And he charged them that no man should know this, and he commanded that something should be given her to eat. I like the way Luke puts it. I'll just read you the Luke version. This is in Luke chapter 8. And her spirit returned. What a day this has been. Starts out with a bunch of spirits being driven out of a guy. And then some of Jesus' spirit taken from him into a woman that touches the hem of his garment. And now the spirit of the little girl that's gone out of her, Jesus calls it back into her. And her parents were amazed, and he charged them to tell no man what had been done. Now, real quick, I've got just a few more minutes. I fouled up at Bible class the other day, started late, and then went even later. What I had forgotten about was that people were waiting to watch it online and couldn't get it. So I got really strongly rebuked by Brother James. We're going to start at 7 and end at 7. Okay. So I'm going to try and do that even tonight to practice for next Sunday afternoon. We'll start at 5 and end at 6. Okay. I get to talking this stuff. It's hard for me to stop. I love doing it so much. Why does Jesus tell them, don't tell anybody? Don't tell anybody. There's a crowd of mourners outside, and other people now starting to gather up, and just down the hill, waiting for him to come back to the dockside. There's a huge throng. Why wouldn't he want somebody running out there telling everyone? Huh? That's the testimony right there. Matthew doesn't have that bit about him telling them to don't tell this to anybody. What Matthew has is, and the fame thereof went forth into all that land. Jesus is trying to dampen it. And even though he tells the principles involved, don't tell anyone, it gets out anyway. Now, I've got a quick, short one I want to give you. Got 5 minutes to do it. Matthew chapter 9, verse 27. This would be, in the order of things, this would be the next event. And as Jesus passed by from thence, I'm sorry, brother Chris, it's Matthew chapter 9, verse 27. I want people to see this. Matthew 9, 27. When Jesus departed from thence, 2 blind men followed him, crying and saying, Thou Son of David, have mercy on us. Read on. And when he was come into the house. Now what house? Remember, there's a house he keeps going to in Capernaum. It's thought to be Peter's mother's house. Where a lot of these things have done, the house in Capernaum. When he's come into the house, the blind men follow him on in. So he's made them to come and be welcome. And Jesus says unto them, Believe ye that I am able to do this? Well, what have they asked for? Son of David, have mercy on us. They haven't even asked to be healed of their blindness. They've just asked to receive mercy. Believe ye that I am able to do this. And they said unto him, Yea, Lord. And he touched their eyes and said, get this, according to your faith be it unto you. Once again, same day. He asked him, do you believe I have the power to do this? Yes. All right, I got the power if you got the faith. He touches their eyes and heals them and says to these two blind men what he had said earlier that afternoon to the woman in the street who touched the hem of his garment. Your faith is what makes you whole. Now, that is quite a covenant, isn't it? It's you that did it, Lord. No, it was your faith that did it. Yeah, but my faith was just in your power to do it. You did it. You did it. It's that thing, right? It's all about you, Lord, and the Lord will look at you and say, not from my viewpoint, it's all about you. I do it all for you. Oh, the way some of these preachers preach. I've heard some of the hard ones. God doesn't need you, you need Him. You're nothing to Him but pond scum. God's not interested in you unless you get interested in Him. It's all about Him. I don't even like those kinds of implications even when they're not stated as brashly as that. As far as God's concerned, it is all about you. He made the universe, made the earth, put everything on it man would need before He made the man. It's quite a design preparing for this little child called humanity to be born. Like a woman expecting a child who paints a room in the house and decorates it and buys all the bassinet and the little crib and all the little things and toys months before the baby comes. Preparing. God prepared everything for humanity. And if not for all of humanity, then at least for each human who believes in Him. And He says, oh, it is all about you. You have the power to do it. You did it. According to your faith. Ain't that a thing? And this was quite a day of faith. Because it began after midnight, early in the morning, in the wee hours, in a storm at sea, when they were terrified. And Jesus had said, that very day, this is the night now again. But it was early that morning, Jesus had said to them, why is it that you have no faith? Why is it that you have little faith? Where is your faith? And it ends with this little story. And then He says, oh, I've got less than a minute. Then He says to them, strictly charges them after their eyes are open. Verse 31, I believe. He says, He strictly charged them and says, see that no man know it. Don't you go telling anybody. He just said that to Jairus' parents or Jairus' family an hour ago, and now He's telling to these two blind men. And guess what happens? And as they went forth, there was brought to Him, but they went forth and spread abroad His fame in all that land. And as they went forth, behold, another guy was brought into the house, a dumb man possessed with a devil. And some Pharisees were looking in the windows, and multitudes were around. And Jesus cast the devil out of this dumb man. Again, the word devil is pneuma akathartos. And it doesn't really mean what we think is a devil, a demon lurking inside the guy. It means a sickness. It is used, an air of illness. They didn't have all the medical, technical words we have nowadays. They just used gloss over terms. It's used for a woman with arthritis, for a boy that has epilepsy. It's used for a blind person. It's used here for a dumb person, someone who can't speak. Anyway, Jesus heals him, and He speaks, casts out the dumb devil, and the dumb man can speak. And the multitudes marveled, saying, it was never so seen in Israel. But the Pharisees looking in say, by the prince of devils He casts out devils. And this wasn't even on a Sabbath day this time. So we're going to pick up there next time I speak on a Wednesday night. Thank you for your attention. Brother James, I did pretty good. I'm 2 minutes old. Thank you.
It don't get no better than that. Let's go ahead and stand to our feet. Father, we love you. Thank you for your word, your kindness, your goodness. Lord, let your word just be like a well of living water in our souls, flowing up. And we're so excited about you, Lord. We can't wait to tell somebody else. You've been so good to us. Get everyone home safely tonight and back here for a good word from you Sunday morning. In Jesus'